And now a little bit about Reverend Paul Lang. And I'm sure he could tell so much more about his own life, but just a few highlights. He was educated at Furman and then Columbia Theological Seminary, where he got his MDiv and his DMin. He, as you know, is the author of more than one book. The first one he co-authored with Ben Johnson, and it's called Time Away. And it sounds like Paul continues to live out that truth by making sure he takes time away. And that is something we all need to do. And the second book, of course, is the Pilgrims Compass. And I believe he's working on a third one. He is presently the executive director of the Institute of Church Renewal. And he has been working for some time now to develop a congregation-based ministry of adult faith formation called The Pilgrimage. And you can learn more at that at thepilgrimage.net. And we'll be learning more about that tonight. And he has two sons, Daniel and Benjamin, and is married to Sarah. So we are thrilled to welcome Paul. I'd like us to open with prayer. I've taken a small portion of the beginning of an evening prayer that can be found on his website, and then expanded it in the end in the italicized part. And I thought perhaps we could read it together. You will stay muted and go ahead and pray it with me, and I will pray it out loud. So let's come before our God in prayer. Let's pray. Jesus Christ is the light of the world, the light no darkness can overcome. Stay with us, Lord, for it is evening. The day is almost over. Let your light shine in the darkness. Lord, come to us as we gather this evening in your name. Inspire us and guide our conversations by your Holy Spirit, and enlighten your church. Amen. And with that, I am going to, what did I say? Spotlight? I'll try spotlighting you, Paul. We were playing with it. I'm like, I'm not sure which one is the best, but we'll try spotlighting you, and I will go on mute. So
wonderful. Well, I am so grateful for the invitation to be with you. My expectation, assumption is that this room that we're in is full of a lot of wisdom beyond my own. And so I'm going to say some things initially, but I'd like to make sure that I leave lots of space, half of our time, on the back end for us to be in dialogue, so that this is a conversation and a seminar, not me just talking at you for too long. The thought I just had a thought that went right out of my head, just like that, gone, absolutely gone. Okay, well, let me say that I bring to you love and greetings from your brothers and sisters in Christ at Cary Presbyterian Church. We are all of us in the Presbyterian Church kissing cousins, and even more so within the confines of such a strong and good presbytery as our own. I'm really glad that we can be together. I have been stewing on the idea of pilgrimage for quite a while now. The thought that left me came back, so I'm going to interject. I'm going to interrupt myself and say, I love the use of that little snippet from Vespers that we used. You may know that's a little snippet of an ancient liturgy from the 4th century. We've been praying those words as an entrance into the service of light, which happens right at dusk every day for thousands of years. So literally millions, maybe billions of Christians for thousands of years have been praying those words. And if you do not pray any version of the daily offices, which is to stop and pray throughout the day, and you want somebody to convince you that it's worth doing, take me to coffee and I will talk with you about that. They are well worth your time. Okay, so I've been thinking about pilgrimage for a while. I think mostly because I grew up in a Presbyterian church that was strong. I had good pastors. I loved my congregation. And I think that we were doing good work as best I can tell. But I was well done with seminary, and I still had the idea that faith was knowing all about God. And it really wasn't until I was out of seminary in my first call and beginning to burn out that the idea that it's intellectually, it is important to know a lot of things, but it's just as important to know God. It's not enough to know about God. You got to know God. And that second piece, that idea of knowing the Almighty, is by definition a relational thing. It's about cultivating a friendship and a loving relationship. And the way that works is like every other relationship in your life. The economy of relationships is time. If you say you love someone, but you don't want to spend any time with them, that's oxymoronic. We spend time with the people we love. So for me, at least early on, the idea of pilgrimage was this idea of how can I make time for God in my life? How can I get to a place where I'm with God and God alone and invest some time in this relationship to see if I can meet this God that I've been chasing for so long? And for me, both the practice of pilgrimage and the metaphor of pilgrimage became important ways of thinking about how do I step out of my life as I live it every day and into a journey that looks like a journey of coming to a deeper and deeper loving relationship with the God who loves me after all, right? So I want to share my screen, and I'm gonna show some things. Let's see. Keynote. Let me see if that's gonna work. Is that gonna work? You're not seeing my keynote, are you?
Not yet.
Okay, hang on. We should have tested this. This is weird. Yeah. I've never had this particular dialog box come up.
Oh, what did it say?
It says, so everything says it's trying to protect me from you by not letting you see what's on my screen. But it must be a new thing in, okay. Hang on, I'll figure it out. Just give me just a moment.
Okay.
Can you share screen?
Yeah, I made him a co-host.
Okay, let me see. Yeah, I'm just trying. It's okay. Hang on. I will work this out. It never occurred. There it is. Okay, let's see. So where is my? Okay, let's go to plan B. I don't want to try to figure this out while you guys are watching. Marita, can you see if you can share?
I can try.
Okay.
We saw how well that went.
Wow, I've done this many times. That's the first time I've ever seen that set of dialogues. So I'm not sure what's up. This is a new computer and it has a new operating system.
Yeah, yeah. Hold on a sec.
So I can say some general things while she's pulling up the slides. Throughout this set of slides, I've got a number of quotes that are attempting to define what pilgrimage is. And none of them are right. I've been collecting definitions of pilgrimage for almost 20 years now. They're all sort of like, you know, John. He isn't Jesus, but he can point at Jesus. And all of them point in the direction of pilgrimage, but all of them in the end lack the fullness of what it is we're trying to describe. So I've given you a bunch of them, and they're interlaced here and there throughout my presentation. My thought about that is simply that you would have those definitions to be available to you as a prompt as you might wonder about pilgrimage in the year to come. Now, while we're waiting for the slides, let me just...
Can you not see them?
No, I can't see them.
Oh, really? Oh my goodness.
What is going on here?
What
is going on here?
Screen.
Okay, hang on. Let me just see if pulling it to a different monitor makes any difference.
See it
there
now?
It goes. Hey, now I see it.
Wow. Okay. Interesting.
All right. So if you would, let's go to slide 2. Now, when I was in seminary, I went on a number of trips that I would call a travel seminar. And travel seminars are not bad things. They're good things, but I want to compare and contrast them with what I think of as pilgrimage. So let me describe to you my first travel seminar. It was with the Albright Institute, and it was in 1993, and I spent several months trekking my way through the Middle East and learning about archaeology. I was totally amazed and fascinated by the whole thing. But we never stopped. We got on the bus at 5 a.m. We were traveling all day. We were hopping off the bus looking at archaeological ruins, and it was very intense. The professor, who was from Emory University, was at the front of the bus just jabbering away. So those are indicative of a sort of travel seminar situation in which you have a tight schedule, you're trying to see a lot of things. The instruction that you need is taking place while you're traveling. So it's sort of look out the window and see this. It typically has little or no worship and prayer and reflection. See, the idea is about learning. And the focus is on seeing as much new geography and as many new people as you can. It's sort of the equivalent of doing a survey course where you're trying to survey a place and get the broad brushstrokes. It begins typically on the day of departure. So when I went on the thing with the Albright Institute, we all flew into Atlanta 3 days before. They locked us up in a hotel, and we did preparation for the trip. And then for the next 5 weeks, we were in Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and Israel. A pilgrimage, by contrast, is a different kind of travel. It has a different intention. It has different hopes. It's aimed in different directions. And those play out in a gentler schedule. When I plan pilgrimages, the last one that we did, we had 2 locations in 2 weeks. So I want you to wrap your head around that. We went to 2 places in 2 weeks. Rather than 10 places a day, we went to 2 places. And both of those places were isolated islands that were hard to get onto and nearly impossible to get off of. And the idea was that people were to sit for a week alone with God and figure it out, right? But you see how much gentler that schedule is. It's aimed at providing space where something can happen to you that isn't about intellect, that's beyond intellect. Silence is preferred on all of the pilgrimages that we do through the pilgrimages. We study for 15 months prior to departure, precisely so that when we get on the bus, nobody has to say anything to you. The last time I had a blue badge guide assigned to me at lunch in Scotland, I took her aside in the lunch hall and handed her an envelope of $100 bills and said, "Go away. You're making us crazy. I love you. I understand why you think you need to present all this material. This is absolutely not what we need. So let me pay you. I love you. I'm grateful for what you do, but go away." Yeah. So the whole idea of pilgrimage is you front load all of that prep so that when you're on the trip, you can be present in the moment without being distracted by the need to learn or listen or whatever, all of those things that are going on. Pilgrimages are immersed in worship. In the pilgrimage, my ministry, we organize all of the pilgrimages around the daily offices. So you have morning, midday, evening, and sometimes night prayer. The idea is that you begin to organize your life and your day in the passage of time, not around what's the next thing you're going to do, but when are you in the liturgical life? Where are you in the liturgical hour? It tends to be bifocal in the sense that it's trying to live in a nice tension between inside and outside. What's going on inside of me? What is the things that are outside of me? How are they impacting what's inside of me? So I tell this story in the book. So this is I should warn you that I tell this story in the book, but it's a good story and it's a true story. I sat on a bus traveling off of Iona back to the mainland, and the woman behind me in the bus was coughing. And the more she coughed, the more irritable I got, because I thought she's gotten on the bus and she's sick. And by the time we get across Mull an hour from now, we're all going to be sick. Now, none of those thoughts were Christ-like or kind or good or admirable. And as I got off the bus and reflected on what was going on inside of me, provoked by what was going on outside of me, it was a teachable moment. I realized that I thought that I was going to go on pilgrimage and be this holy man. And what happened is I brought the jerk that is me along with me on the trip. So that I had to, in that moment, begin to deal with myself. And pilgrimage is about doing that constant negotiation of what is the thing that's outside of me or the person outside of me. What are they bringing up inside of me? How can I look at that inner life and ask the question, what is God trying to say to me? The goal of a pilgrimage is not to know more, unless what you mean by that is to know God in the sense that you love God better and your neighbor better and yourself more. And as I mentioned before, the beginning tends to be at least a year before departure. A pilgrimage actually begins long before you ever leave home, because it involves this process of getting ready spiritually, and all the prep work is as important as going. Next slide. So I will tell you, some years ago, I first ran into the next, can you give me slide number 3?
Sorry, that's what's there.
This is so hard. It's so hard.
That's what's there.
Well, all right, I'm going to tell you what's on slide 3, and you're going to give them the PDF of this, right?
Okay. Yep.
Is that fair?
Yep.
All right, I'll use my slides here.
Can you not scroll down or click on one of those sidebar panels? But who is controlling this PowerPoint?
Marita is.
Yeah.
So why isn't it behaving like a normal PowerPoint? You're clicking on the third panel over to the left?
I am pressing enter and the arrow button. That's what I've got. I'm sorry. This is what comes.
How about scrolling the scroll bar over on the right side of that screen?
Click on it. Yeah. Next slide. I wonder if she sees what we're.
I don't think I can see it.
You don't see a scroll bar, yeah.
No.
Okay, that's okay. We're going to make this work.
Oh, shoot.
Let me just say that I think right now, with what's happening in the nation, and what's happening with the pandemic, and frankly, what's happening in many of our churches as we make our way into the 21st century, a century where what we used to do doesn't work anymore and probably isn't going to work again. Many of us are feeling bewildered by that. We feel like the ground beneath us is not as solid as it once was. And as hard as all of those things are, all of those sensations are relevant to pilgrimage. And so I have a new favorite author that I'm reading these days. His name is Belden Lane. If you've not bumped into Belden Lane, he's worth discovering. And in his book, The Solace of Fierce Landscapes, he begins the book in the preface by saying this. And he's just described, by the way, the slow death of his mother and the trauma that brought in his own life. And then he says this: only at the periphery of our lives, where we and our understanding of God alike are undone, can we understand bewilderment as occasioning another way of knowing. Now, I think that is a beautiful sentiment. That's worth journaling for a couple of weeks on that. It is precisely at that place in our lives where it all feels like it's unraveling and the things we think we know are undone. That's when we're made ready to know in a new way and to know more. And I think that is, for many of us, in terms of the current status of this highly polarized world in which we live and the constant sense of isolation that the pandemic has brought on, I think many of us have been driven to that place where our understanding of God and our own selves has been undone. And that can hurt and be just uncomfortable, but it can also be the occasion of learning to new, of coming to learn in a new way. So I want to, Marita, if that was a clever trick you just did, skip the next slide and go to the definition beneath it, which is in a colored palette.
Okay.
So this first definition, yeah, anytime. This first definition is from Esther DeWall, and
can you see that?
I can't.
You cannot?
I'll just read it off my slide. It's okay. The Celtic understanding of journeying is in itself rich and significant. It is peregrinatio, seeking quest, adventure, wandering, and exile. It's an ultimate journey to find the place of my resurrection, the rescued self. I'm sorry, the resurrected self, the self that I might hope to be, to become the true self in Christ. Now, once again, this is a great little definition. You can spend a couple of months on this. To find the place of my resurrection? Okay, so we have to die. Death is a precursor to resurrection. So this journey we're on, in a sense, is the search to let all that is in us that is not Christ-like to die, so that the real life, the life of Christ that is in us, can become fully visible, fully manifest, fully enlightened, right? So you may know that Thomas Merton wrote that all of us are living a dozen lives and only one of them is real. And that's the life of Christ that's in us. But the problem is the life of Christ is constantly being threatened that we're going to smother it under the anxiety that we have not yet gotten our share. And so we're greedy and we're rapacious and we're angry and we're not good neighbors because we're still trying to make sure we get our share. And that little life of Christ is always getting smothered under our anxiety about whether we've gotten our share. I think he and Esther DeWall would have gotten along really well because she's pointing to the same notions, right? Okay, so I want to talk for just a moment about, raise your hand if you have bumped into Victor and Elizabeth Turner as authors. They are anthropologists from the 20th century. Victor and Elizabeth Turner are really the ones who have given us the modern understanding of the word liminal. The word liminal has been around longer than them, but what Victor Turner and Elizabeth Turner did was they went all over the world and they studied rites of passage among adolescents in cultures all over the world. And what they noticed is it didn't matter where you were, they all looked the same. So whether it was a Hutu tribe in Africa or whether it was indigenous populations in Australia, or whether it was the Order of the Arrow in the Boy Scouts of the United States, you always do the same thing. You take the young adolescent away from mama and daddy, you stick them out in the wilderness somewhere by themselves, you tell them that they cannot speak for 3 or 4 days, and you invite them to wonder about what the vision of their life looks like. You give them a vision quest. And what they noticed is this pattern of behavior, this pattern of things all over the world in cultures that are widely disparate from one another often have the outcome of inviting someone to imagine that they could be someone new. That what happens after liminality is that you are set free from the things that define you long enough to imagine that you could be someone new. Now, that concept is why you go off to summer camp and on Wednesday night, you write your mother a postcard saying, I was out on the soccer pitch and I looked up and I saw all of the stars and I realized for the first time in my life that I am nothing. And yet God loves me anyway. But see, what happened was you got 3 days away from mama and your friends in the neighborhood and all of the other things that define you. You got to a new place with a different pattern and you were able to imagine something new. Now, why do I tell you that? Pilgrimage is about doing that. So I always try to make sure that when I'm on pilgrimages, I am far enough away from home that in my case, my books on the bookshelf are not talking to me anymore. I got to get away from intellectual authorship. So I got to get out of town. I'm going to a hermitage this week. I probably won't say 10 words to 2 people for 8 days. That's hard for me because I like to talk. But see, what I'm doing is I'm trying to get to a liminal place. I'm going to somebody else's house. They've left it there alone for me to be in, it's mine alone. And I'm just going to try to imagine what it might look like if I was not who I am. So I'm running low on time. And what I want to do is, how many of you watched Game of Thrones? Did any of you watch that program? Not a lot of people are raising your hands. There's a little girl in this wild sort of mythic story about kingdoms conquering one another. And this little girl, who really is about 7 or 8 years old in the beginning, her name's Arya. And she's sort of a rugged little girl. She's not like her older sister who likes to do needlework. Arya likes to shoot arrows. And over the course of, I think Game of Thrones had 7 or 8 seasons. It went almost a decade in the shooting of this program. Arya grows up on the screen, right? And she grows up in the storyline. And she goes, it's a long series of events you don't need to know, but she ends up on the other side of the world. And she begins to study with this group of priests who are called the Faceless Men. And they basically, it's a death cult is what it is. It's a religion that's organized around death. Throughout her training, they keep asking her, who are you? And she knows that the right answer is, I'm no one. So she keeps saying, I'm no one. And they always hit her and say, no, you're Arya Stark, right? This goes on for months and months and months. And by the time she finally makes it through this process of becoming a faceless person, you, as a viewer, you're thinking, are we ever going to let this girl grow up, right? Now, what I want you to observe about this is, on the backside of that, Arya, for the first time, becomes herself. She had to risk being no one in order to become someone new. And all of us have that pattern in our lives. We live lives that are so largely defined by who we are and who we've been. And to become someone new, we have to risk the possibility of letting go of some of that so that we can become something new. Now, why do I tell you this? I quote in the early part of the book that some of you are about to study, my mother, who at the age of 69 began her first spiritual journal. She began it because she read Ben Johnson's book, To Pray God's Will. And she sat down with a journal. First sentence of the first page is this: I have been in the church all of my life. I've taught Sunday school. I've been an elder. I've done all of the things that were expected of me. And now I'm 69. My youngest child is out of the house. I was at seminary at that point. And she said, I'm going to try to see if I can come to love the God I've known all my life, but never loved. Now, I find that to be an astonishing moment of clarity. That at 69, she realized she'd been doing all the right things, but maybe for all the wrong reasons, because she didn't even know this God that she claimed she loved. And what I want to tell you is she got busy. The last 2.5 decades of her life were a serious pursuit of the God who loved her. And what she was doing is this stuff that I'm talking about. She may not have articulated it that way, but what she was risking stopping being, my father was a surgeon.
Sorry, could you say that again?
My father was a surgeon. She was always the president of the junior league, and she was busy being the surgeon's wife. She was risking not doing that anymore, right? And thinking, what would I be if I'm not that? Maybe it's a disciple of Jesus Christ. Now, I'm going to stop, but so that we can talk back and forth. But in my mind, the discipline of pilgrimage as a journey and the metaphor of pilgrimage as a way of thinking about my discipleship are all about trying to work that liminal process. Because I think many of us yearn for a deep relationship with God, and we don't know how to get there. And maybe the first step is to set aside some of the things we think we know before we set out. All right, I'm going to hush. What I'd like to do is just invite you to comment or question, and then we'll be in dialogue from now on.
So Paul, back when I did campus ministry at Duke for 15 years, and would take people on mission trips. I've probably done 30 mission trips, right? And the longer we did them, the more I wanted to call them pilgrimages. I think we wanted to call them pilgrimages for years, but we couldn't get away with that language because nobody knew what it meant, and it just didn't communicate, right? Yeah. But all these things you said, and I was just noticing how much, we began a semester, which in the life of a college student is a year.
Yeah, right.
we began a semester 4, we had them do lots of reading on the history of where we were going. And we did a lot of practices of morning and noon. And evening. We always said, we're going to go live a little bit like monks for a while. We don't get to do that in the rest of our lives, most of us, but we're just going to try to shape our lives almost like a monastic community. We're going to try to be church like we never get to try to be church, where we're living with each other 24/7 and eating together. And we did do silent retreats before we left, and then we did them on the thing at the end, and journaling and all these things that you say. And I think combined with actually doing a little bit of work. I mean, when you're on mission trips, you know, it's the whole idea of what we can do for others. You explore that in the first chapter of your book, and I'm so excited about that. I read your book several years ago, and I'm kind of excited to be able to read back through it again and do it with people. But this just became, this is what I wanted to call them all. This is what we wanted to call them. And when I did the Camino a few years back, what I noticed, I almost wonder if there's something developmental about all this. Camino is either 20-year-olds or it's 60 and 70 and 80 year-olds.
Yeah.
It's so interesting to me. I just think there's something developmental about how this comes up for us, I think, twice in our lives. I think a lot of us live on those liminal experiences we have from our 20s through our 30s and 40s and 50s. Yep. We kind of live off of it, or at least that's what I feel like I was doing. When I got into my 50s, I began to realize, man, I need to start updating my experiences, right? It had been a long time since I'd really had my practice.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah, so Paul, Dave Mountain here. I'm kind of echoing some of what Sherry's saying. I really liked the differentiation between the travel trip and the pilgrimage. I was fortunate enough to be one of the adults along on the Iona youth trip that was done a few years back, and Frank and Margaret, your kids were on there as well. That was a great experience for them. I think it was a great experience for me. But exactly what you described there, I was looking at the list on the bullet list as it went down and said, yep, that was it. That was it. That was it. So I really, that was a distinction that I hadn't really thought of before. I appreciate you bringing that out.
Well, and I'll add to that. Our oldest son went on the first Iona trip that Chris led. And the story that stuck with me was one of the girls on the trip, they weren't allowed to have their phones with them. You know, they had to turn their phones in before the trip started, and they got their phones back, I think, when they landed in Philadelphia on the way home. And Allie Ruffing, Allie said when she gave a little sermon in church about it, that she didn't want to turn her phone back on because it had just been so powerful and super social girl, tons of friends, you know, on her phone constantly. And it was so great to not be on her phone that she didn't want to turn it back on. Yeah. And I just felt like that was, from a teenage girl, that was a testament to the power of the pilgrimage.
That's huge. I will tell you, the first 3 pilgrimages that we did in this ministry, I still felt, as a pilgrimage leader, I felt this anxiety that they weren't going to get it unless I explained it to them every day. And so the first 3 pilgrimages, we would have these things where I would give them something every day. And the last 2, by the mercies of the Almighty, somebody said, you know, I think they're clever enough to figure this out. Why don't you just put them on Holy Island and leave them alone for a week? Give them resources, help them know how they might use their time usefully, but no instruction whatsoever. It was really a challenge for me to let go of a sense of, do I need to make this happen for them? But what happened is they all had a more meaning. So now this ministry will really do nothing but contemplative model from here on. And oddly enough, even the seminary that sent me on that wild ride through Syria and Jordan and Egypt, they have now asked me to help them redevelop that trip on a contemplative model. Because I think that all of us are feeling what this young lady learned, which is, boy, it would be a blessing if I didn't have a phone. Yeah. who else has a holy moment sort of journey pilgrim thing that they want to wonder about?
I don't have something like that, but David Brooks, who writes for the New York Times, has written a book, and I'm embarrassed to say, I think it's called The Second Mountain. And it follows what Sherry was just talking about, that he says that you reach a certain point in your older life that you reach, or you can reach, not everybody does, but you can reach a higher morality in your life, and you understand the importance of that. So when Sherry said that, I said, that sounds familiar. Mm-hmm. So there's something to that, apparently.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Frank.
Thank you. Sorry. I'm just curious about your mother. This 20-year pilgrimage that you said she went on. You know, as her son, is there anything you could share with us about, you know, how was that for her? What did you notice as her son in her journey?
Yeah, it's almost comical, because what I'm going to tell you is that as a woman with an advanced degree from Duke, her impulse was to go back to school. If she wanted to learn to love God, of course she'd go back to school. So she spent 3 years doing a certificate in spiritual formation at Columbia Theological Seminary. And what that did was put her within the library of authors who could help her. And because she was an educator, her whole life she taught, the way it played out in terms of service to the world is she'd go learn something, she'd go buy 30 of the books, bring them back to my home church and teach for a year, right? So she'd give everybody a book and then she'd teach for a year. But here's the thing, two things happened. One, it began to dawn on her, it's not enough for them to know more. If the information isn't paired with a discipline of formation, it's essentially Sunday school where you go sit for an hour and somebody didacts at you. I'm not saying that's a terrible thing, because I like that. But if you want someone's heart to be transformed, you have to do what's called shared praxis. That's a educational theory where adults, the way adults learn is they learn something, you make them do it for 30 days, and then you ask them to circle back around and say, what happened to me when I did that for 30 days? That's shared praxis. And my mother figured that out. What my mother realized was, when I teach about Sabbath keeping, what I have to do is find a way to help my students engage with a conversation. What would it look like in my life if I tried to keep Sabbath for the next month? And then they would all try to do it. And then they'd talk about it. So that's one piece of it. But as her son, let me tell you, what I saw was a woman who was already a saint in my mind. She got to a place where she was at peace with herself and her neighbors and her crazy sister. And she was at peace in a way that I had never known. I don't mind telling you, I'm a depressive. I went through 9 years of clinical depression. I've seen some dark places, and I got that from my mother, who struggled her whole life with depression. But you know, she was at peace even with the reality of her depressive tendencies. And so a quick story to illustrate this, that she started getting dementia when we finally had to intervene. Her house was full of JAMA articles. She'd been, for years, my mother knew something was wrong. And she was reading all of these AMA articles about dementia, trying to figure out how to fix this, right? And she and I stood in the front yard of her house and wept together before I drove her to Charleston, where my sister, who's a nurse, could take care of her. And my mother said, this is the house that I built. My father died when I was a child, and my mother sold the big house and built this little one. She said, this is the house that I built. And I'll never have this sort of independence again. Now, what I want to tell you is, after we moved her that day, the next day we got up, and my father-in-law, who'd been helping me move all of her furniture, was driving me back to North Carolina. And we got about 20 minutes away from my mother's new home. And he said, Paul, I don't think you get this. And I said, well, okay, by all means, enlighten me. And he said, when I took my mother out of her house and put her in a assisted living, she cussed me for 6 years. Mm. And your mother just did that graciously. She let you leave with a blessing. And you need not imagine that that's the way this goes down. It isn't. Now, see, I think my mother was able to do that because she had for 10 years been praying the office of Compline the last hour of the day. Sorry, could you say that? And what she had learned in Compline is that our daily practice is a dress rehearsal for the hour of our death. At the end of the day, as we submit into sleep, we yield control over the people we're worried about, the agendas we're trying to perpetuate in the world, our influence. We let go of all of that. And we trust that God is going to handle this until I wake up. So that when we get to the last hour, when we really are relinquishing our control and fall into the last sleep, it's not a huge crisis for us, because we've been that daily dress rehearsal. My mother had been daily dying, and so she had that virtue of fortitude. You know, she could endure the trouble that came graciously. Now, I think that's beautiful, and I don't think she would have gotten there except that she started this journey of prayer and practice back to God.
Oh, let me say that that program you talked about that Columbia Seminary does, the certificate in spiritual formation. I've done that certificate, and it's always half lay and half clergy, and it is a beautiful, beautiful program, and it got me to praying for the most faithfully I've ever prayed in my life. And you're right. You said it so beautifully. That's exactly what I think it is. It's practice for either what is right now. I don't know why all of our phones are going off. For either what is right now or what will be. And it calls on some really deep and almost traditional things that I thought I had gotten too sophisticated for. But I don't even know how to explain it. When you're practicing it and not trying to critique it becomes a relationship.
I think that's absolutely right.
And coming out of, Southern Baptist kind of devotional life, which in some ways I'm actually grateful for, because it did give me a notion that I should be doing something with God every day, which I'm not sure my Presbyterian roots always did. It was just the same thing. It put me into a bigger T tradition. Yeah, I just can't say enough good things about that program. And what I've seen, what you're telling me about your mother, I've heard lots of other people say that very same thing. And it's very accessible. You can do it in a year and a half. You can I think I took 5 years, honestly, to get through it. You can kind of go with it, but it's a really wonderful program. It's expensive. That's just the only bad thing.
Well, and my friend and mentor, Ben Johnson, was the one that started that program at Columbia. And the pilgrimage ministry that I'm currently developing happened because I invited Ben to come be a guest speaker in my congregation as sort of a satellite for the Certificate in Spiritual Formation program. And at the end of 3 or 4 days, Ben looked, I had a group that was called Seekers of Shalom that met every Thursday night, and we were doing these things. And he looked at what we had covered in the last several years and said, Paul, there are people in your church that can't afford, like your mother, to fly down to Atlanta 3 times a year. So why don't you just do this in the church? And I've been in dialogue with the certificate program. I've taught for them twice, but I'm in dialogue with them about being, Jane Bernard has been teaching spiritual formation in the congregation. She was their go-to author and leader for that. They've talked with me now twice about coming to fill that slot, because I think they're wondering too, how do you do this in a local congregation so that people don't have to fly to Atlanta?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, even in our seminaries, so for 10 years, I taught spiritual formation to first year divinity school students at Duke, something I never got.
Me either.
I think and I remember being kind of disappointed about it as a young person. It almost made me want to be Catholic or something. We just weren't expected to do anything spiritually. I did go to chapel every day, but even most seminaries moved to a once a week chapel. Peter McWilliams is on here. He went to Princeton. Maybe it was the same. I'd be interested what your experience was. But there just were so very few requirements of us to be formed. We were just supposed to show up to class.
Yep.
So it's changed my life. Yeah.
I'm a child of the 60s in that regard. And yes, we did go to chapel every day. But it has fallen by the wayside to a great extent. And I'm reminded of my brother, who has 2 law degrees, one from Emory and one from Cambridge. So that's 6 years of studying the law. He never once was in a courtroom until after he graduated 2 times. So things do change.
Yeah. Yeah.
Are there other questions or things that make you curious or challenge you as you have listened to Paul?
I want to get that certificate.
Go for it, Bonnie. You'd love it.
Yeah, Bonnie, you would. I guess my biggest reaction is fear of failure. That the expectation is one that, would be very welcomed and satisfying. And yet I just feel like somehow I wouldn't do it right. And I wouldn't have that feeling. Is that common? You're nodding. So I think I probably didn't say anything you haven't heard before.
When my mother completed the certificate program and went to Iona, that was the pilgrimage that she took.
Uh-huh.
By the way, I know all of this because when Mom got sick, she insisted that I take her journals. I was not at all sure that I wanted them because I had no idea what was in them. As it turns out, they're full of all of these struggles and reflections.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things you often do on pilgrimages before you leave, you give something up. In my case, it might be whiskey. I'm not going to drink whiskey on the pilgrimage, right? You give something up that you think is not helping you. And my mother gave up the little voice in the back of her head that kept telling her she wasn't enough. She wasn't smart enough. She wasn't pretty enough. She wasn't clever enough. She wasn't rich enough. All that. And throughout that pilgrimage, she'll be journaling and she'll say, I see you, little bird. I see you over there. Tell him, you don't belong with me here. You just fly away home because I'm on pilgrimage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I kid you not, when I went to Iona this last time, I was really struggling with a similar situation of constantly feeling like I had not measured up. It was a crisis because my mentor, Ben Johnson, who published 30 books and everybody in the world knew Ben, died unexpectedly. And the board at ICR asked me to take over. And in fact, said to me at the time, we think you're the next Ben Johnson. Well, that was not a situation that I wanted, right? Mm-hmm. Ben and I had talked about me taking over, but 20 years from now when I was ready to retire, not while I was still trying to be a pastor. But I was feeling a lot of anxiety about not measuring up because I'm no Ben Johnson, not even remotely. And I took a day away from my pilgrims and walked all the way over the island to Columbus Bay by myself. It was a miserable, wretched day with the rain blowing sideways. I had almost $13,000 worth of brand new camera gear that I had schlepped all the way from North Dakota to Iona. And I went running down onto the beach and I threw my gear over the edge of this rock onto a ledge and threw my raincoat over it to keep the rain off of it. And then I spent 3 or 4 hours searching the beach for Columbus tears. When I went back, when the rain finally stopped, I went back and I got my raincoat and I picked up my bag, and underneath the photography bag was a rock painted, "I am enough."
Oh.
What? What? Just one of those amazing moments when you're on pilgrimage and you think, okay, I got it. Thank you. God got tired of whispering and hit me with a rock.
Paul, I've got to ask you about North Dakota. What were you doing there? I grew up in Mandan.
Oh, wonderful. Twice in my life, I've said to God, I'll go anywhere. And the second time I said to God, I'll go anywhere. We went to North Dakota. We were in North Dakota 8 years before coming back to Cary.
Wow.
North Carolina's home. And we loved Fargo. That church treated me better than I deserved the whole time I was there. Wonderful people. Yeah, it was a great place. But my mother passed away while I was there. The church was very good to fly me home whenever I wanted to help take care of her. But Sarah's parents, we just thought, we don't want to do this again, being 1,300 miles away. And so Sarah's parents are in Greenville, North Carolina, and we're back in Cary. She's over there 2 or 3 days a week, just helping out.
Sorry, I had to ask because North Dakota doesn't get mentioned much.
I know, it's a great state though. Although it's actual 30 below today, I think the wind chill is 45 below today. So it's a cold day.
Wow. Well, thank you, Paul. I'm sorry for those challenges in terms of accessing your PowerPoint, but I feel like we've really been able to connect with you and hear more deeply about what your passion is, and truly, Lord willing, it will become a passion for many. Everyone, I have, I believe, 5 more books that should have arrived by now. If you are interested in purchasing a book through the church, $10, and that will cover it. And of course, Sherry still has room in her class, and reach out to her to receive the Zoom link. It'll start on Zoom and they're going to see how it goes. I mean, this is the state of the world that we live in right now. So, but reach out.
Let me just say, Sherry, if you guys get confused at some point and can't figure out what it is I'm trying to say, call me and I'll Zoom in with you and
that would be great.
clarify.
Actually, I would love to do that, especially at the end, And I just need to give you a word of personal thanks. The Pilgrims Prayer, I have used and used and used and used. I've prayed it myself a lot. And I'm glad to know where the place of our resurrection, that's always been a line that's really hit
That's
me.
where it came from.
I was wondering, wow, Paul is just amazing, but you were amazing for picking it up.
let me mention to you that I wrote a commentary on that prayer for my pilgrims in North Dakota, and it's my intention to do that as a Lenten daily devotion commentary on this, because there are a lot of parts of that prayer that allude to other things. And so I'm actually going to close this tonight with the Pilgrims Prayer.
If you would send that to me, I'd love it, if you don't mind.
All right. Yeah.
Good. Well, thank you again, Paul. It's been a real privilege to have you here on Zoom, and we're very, very grateful. And
well, thank you. It's been a blessing to me too. I will close this in prayer, and then you can go to the rest of your night. Sounds good. Lead us, Lord, gently, pervasively, irresistibly, increasingly, that we might walk our pilgrim way steadily and find the place of our resurrection. Lead us, Lord, so that we do not dally or disobey, nor turn aside, nor stand still, nor stumble, nor turn back in loyalty to old gods who will not bless us. Lead us, Lord, as a felt presence, as a constant companion, as our counselor in the hour of perplexity, as our first, fast, last friend. Lead us, Lord, by the restlessness of spiritual hunger, by the hope of finding our true home, by the yearning of a hungry heart. Lead us, Lord, by grace to gratitude, by gratitude to generosity of spirit, by generosity to mercy, that we might cultivate a compassionate heart. And lead us, Lord, by your loving embrace, so that we do not forget or fall away, but remain steadfast and loyal, joyful and true on this journey with you. And let all of the people say, amen.
Amen.